Hello, everybody. So I'm super excited to welcome back one of our very own strategists, Caelin. Welcome back to the show. I'm so stoked to talk again.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're having me back.
Yes. So last uh, didn't tune in to our last episode together, we talked about cognitive load, how it affects agency leaders and entrepreneurs, how to reduce it. Today, we are going to be digging into a topic that is a lot more copy and project specific. This is something that we hear about all the time. I think anyone on our team would agree, which is the question of when you're producing copy for clients, how negative is too negative? And this is the term that we hear a lot from clients is negative. I don't want things to be too negative. Anyway, I personally believe and have experienced that the concept of being negative is actually a pretty vague one. But it is a term that we hear a lot. So I'm curious, Caelin, can you start by kind of sharing what you think clients mean when they're concerned about copy being negative?
Yeah, I think vague is the perfect word to describe it because, what actually is negative, right? That just varies from audience to audience. Certain words can have negative connotations to one audience that they don't have to another. So negative is really, really vague, but ultimately what I find clients want is they don't want copy that's like twisting the knife in someone, right? They don't
Okay.
want people to read their copy and feel bad about themselves and thus, effectively like our client is bullying them.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that essentially when clients say they're concerned about copy being too negative, they're concerned about unintentionally alienating their audience as opposed to creating connection with them by essentially rubbing their face in their pain or their problems. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. And if you go back to like a lot of, I originally trained in like old school direct response copywriting. And if you look at a lot of their techniques, they're like super hypey. They personally, I always felt like when I was doing those exercises, like I was writing bad infomercials. And there's this element of like blowing things out of proportion and
Mm.
really just digging in. And it's very much overplayed and people in general really don't like that style. So that I often is what I feel people are going by when they say too negative.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think we all have had enough old school commercials shoved down our throats that we can immediately kind of think to mind, it comes to mind that kind of like greasy salesperson or like something like that. So if we consider modern copywriting, right, which is ethical but also effective, where does this idea of negativity kind of fit in? Like, is there a place for, I guess, speaking to the pain and the problem, or what value does that have as part of the process?
Yeah, so as part of the process, it's still extremely valuable, but I am very much a fan of putting it in negativity. We'll say negativity is like representing any kind of problem, because this is
Hmm.
often what we see when we work with clients or agencies. If you represent the problem at all, they're often like, push the brakes, this is too negative, I don't want to talk about this, we want to talk about solutions and we want to fill people with hope. And that's because our people have such great hearts. But the thing is, negativity or like agitation, because if you go to even some of the modern copywriting frameworks like PAS, problem agitation solution,
Yeah.
there's that always that element of we need to represent the problem, we need to represent what's actually going on in someone's life. And
Hmm.
that comes down to a lot of things like neuroscience, how our brains process story and information. Specifics always trigger more stuff in the brain. There's really interesting stuff about like mirror neurons and how they create empathy. And effectively, when you're just representing the problem, sort of stating as is, rather than really digging the knife in and twisting and being like very much the way you said earlier with me. Okay, here's what I'm saying. Here's what I'm hearing you say. Right? When we're
Hmm.
doing something that's a lot more of an active listening and reflecting back, people can actually go, oh, this is meant for me. This is designed to specifically address my situation right? If you think of who we work with agencies, you can have agencies that are set up in various different, they might handle web design or branding or, other forms of marketing. But they don't handle copy, and copy is a pain point for all of them. However, when you look at, the agency is a specific business model, so they all end up with the same sort of pain points. But if you were to look at other businesses, I used to write for product launches, and I used to be in the supplement space, so it was a lot of subscription stuff. And those have two totally different sets of problems associated with them, and agencies are a third. And so when an agency is looking for a copywriter, someone saying, oh, I'm going to help you with like reduce churn and increase, product trials, that's not going to resonate for them. Right? So it is very much about enabling your reader to see themselves using your solution.
Right? Okay. So let me see if I'm breaking down what you're saying correctly. So first of all, most copy frameworks, even now in the modern day, do include some sort of pain, agitation. And what I'm hearing from you is that rather than agitation, you like to look at that concept through the lens of active listening. So it's not enough to just tell the audience, okay, you have this problem and I understand. You need to show them that you understand by potentially speaking to some of the symptoms and kind of reflecting back what their experience is, so that they're I'm hearing kind of two reasons. One is so that they're contextually aware of how the solution will actually help them. And two is so that they can identify whether this solution is for them specifically, as opposed to someone else. Am I?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So then, with that in mind, so I'm hearing that we're never going to throw out the idea of speaking to kind of the problem and people's experiences totally. The idea is to reframe it. So then how do we understand, especially through the lens of an agency leader who maybe isn't a copywriter, what is healthy agitation, slash what is active listening versus what is, putting unnecessary salt into the wound or being manipulative, twisting the knife to manipulate someone?
So the way I always come at it is if you go into like old school sales theory, I think it's a book called Spin Selling by Neil Rackham. It's ancient, but he lays out this thing called implications really well. So what you want to do basically is you take a problem and you look at the financial implications for a business. So if we're looking at copy, what's the implication to him of having to, wrangle freelancers who miss deadlines, having to write the copy himself? What's the cost in terms of time? What does that mean for him monetarily? What does that mean for him trying to grow and scale the business? So there's implications there. And you always kind of want to address those implications because those usually speak to the deeper emotions and the deeper motivations. That's the values is like, say we're talking, they're family people, right? They built this agency to have a better life for their family. And now all of a sudden, because they're wrangling these copywriters, they don't get to spend time with their kids. That's saying like, hey, yeah, you know what? You're busy working nights and weekends, rewriting copy because your freelancer messed up or missed a deadline. That's absolutely fine. That is very much a reflection of what's going on. Saying you're doing this and you're never going to see your kids graduate and you missed your baby's first steps, and like throwing out all these really like hammering in on all these moments of loss or pain and saying like you're never going to get there. That's really when you take it too far. You really kind of want to represent now and sort of really help them see what's going on instead of actually like dragging it out and just hitting them over and over again with this hurts, this hurts, this hurts.
Okay. So, and I immediately want to relate this to kind of like healthy conflict and healthy communication in general, because I think there's a lot of overlap here where, when I was, in a space where a lot of my conflict was super unhealthy, it was very tempting to go for the pain, so to speak, and to kind of like fling things that I knew would like hit someone in the feels and like cause pain. I'm going to be honest, it's not, I'm not proud of admitting this, and it took me many years to kind of identify that negative pattern and move out of it. But these days, that's not to say that I've eliminated conflict from my life, because I perceive that conflict can be one of the most healthy and transformative things in any kind of relationship, but rather that now I've learned to speak a little bit more, I don't know if objectively is the right term, because you're still speaking emotionally, you're still speaking about like your needs and etc., but you're speaking to it in the context of real consequences, not just the maximum amount of pain that kind of could come as a result of this behavior. So just kind of relating it back specifically to the copywriting principle, what I'm hearing is that in terms of some kind of green flags to look for, in terms of healthy agitation or active listening, is, for example, are we speaking to the consequences of what that problem will lead to within the context of what they value? I'm hearing that maybe you're speaking to real symptoms that people who are experiencing that problem have shared, versus red flags that I'm hearing would be, speaking to the most extreme possible consequence as if it's the expected or normal consequence. I'm hearing that you're speaking to it exclusively almost on an emotional level, as opposed to on that logistical and that emotional level. Can you give a few more examples maybe of like green flags, red flags?
Yeah, I think as soon as you said the word symptoms, of course, I started thinking of the pandemic.
No.
I know, but I've had several friends contract COVID within the last few months. And what really stands out for me, of course, is we do have these edge cases where, formerly healthy people are developing POTS. Of course, people are dying. Like, there are severe consequences to this disease. But by and large, like, it is a nasty virus and it is not fun to deal with. But by and large, most of the symptoms are milder. So when we're talking about, you almost want to sort it into that. Is it the migraine and the shortness of breath and the muscle aches and the fatigue that you expect? Or is it, if you get this disease, you're going to get POTS or you're going to die, right? Like, you're going to end up in some really horrible, it's, it's almost, it very much reminds me, having dealt with anxiety a lot of my life, it very much reminds me of the catastrophic thinking that a lot of people with anxiety, ADHD, any sort of neurodivergence do, where you instantly take everything to the most extreme, worst outcome and use that to try to hammer people into changing. Whereas, what I love about your point about healthy conflict is, in healthy conflict, you're both focused on the solution and you're both focused on growing, instead of literally one person is hammering at you. You need to do this thing because I want you to, and I'm going to guilt and shame and manipulate you into doing it until I get what I want.
Yeah, as opposed to, being authentic and educating you and letting you kind of decide whether those consequences are consequences that you're willing to tolerate. It's ultimately in conflict and in communication and in any kind of relationship, whether it's a client-business relationship, whether it's, a writer-audience relationship, you're never going to be able to force someone to do something. You can stack the deck and kind of manipulate them and etc. But I put it out there that not only is that, against our values, but ultimately it is less effective because people don't like to be manipulated. They don't like to feel like they're being forced. But if you can present it and be like, okay, this is who it's for, this is what that experience is like, this is some of the consequences you may not have thought of, or some of the symptoms that you may not have realized you're experiencing. And here's how we can potentially help you with that. You're essentially helping them make an educated decision about whether they fit into that category, as opposed to pushing them towards basically making a decision just because.
Oh God. Okay. So there's so much I want to talk about in here. I love how you're talking about like choosing, because at the end of the day, in any sales interaction, and marketing is sales, copywriting is sales, in any sales interaction, the buyer is the one who has the power. The buyer is choosing to give you their credit card, to say yes, to hand over their money. And when we're talking about this kind of agitation, it actually denies the buyer's agency and tries to coerce them into making this decision. And that's where I think a lot of people are so uncomfortable with it for very justifiable reasons, right? None of us want to be that asshole. And I think what's so interesting about this is, like, I used to work in sales and I was selling high-end luggage in, you know, regular retail settings. You know, we're talking like $500-600 a suitcase here. So not like an unthought out purchase. And there was one girl on the team who could talk your ear off, like wasn't sleazy or manipulative, but you got the sense that people were buying just to get her to shut up and leave them alone. And, you know, there's that just sort of like, oh, it does this and then blah, 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 very much like sort of agitating, you know, oh, well, you know, this is great for this, and just going on and on and on all the time. And sure, her sales numbers might have been higher on average than mine. Her returns were also 2 or 3 times what my returns were. And so you're looking at people who make this choice, but then sort of back off, or like they would find out, okay, oh yeah, no, like maybe we'll buy these things. We might come back for that other thing. When are you in again? And they'd come in when they knew she was off. Right? Because they're avoiding the person who has kind of manipulated them into this thing. And you see it a lot with like, you know, in the SaaS space, you see it a lot with like churn, where people are just like, I'm not using this product, or, you know, we signed up for this. And, you know, especially not the example that comes up in terms of negativity for me is like the used car salesperson, where you're just sort of like, you know, whatever. Okay. You know, we just need to go call our bank, and then they never come back, right? Because they're feeling so pressured and they just want to get out of there, but it's not the sort of thing where you can make a purchase. But there are points where people will just make the purchase just to get you to shut up and leave them alone, but then they never come back, and you're not actually creating relationships. In terms of, I do have a good example I want to give here. It was a copywriter who was doing a training on how to run sessions with day rates. And she had this, like, you know, this is for you if, this is not for you if section. And her this is not for you if section had a line about, if you don't like doing deeply focused work for 6 hours at a time, or if you can't, you know, focus for 6 hours at a time, at least, she's like, this is not for you. And as soon as I read that line, I'm like, oh, this is exactly what I needed, because I can't do that. Not on demand, right? That's not how you know, ADHD, neurodivergent brain works. Hyperfocus is not like that.
No, unfortunately not. No, you can't just put it in the direction of whatever you want it to be, unfortunately.
Right.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, what I'm hearing is that effective copy, and a very effective copywriter, essentially, the difference, I would say, perhaps between a copywriter and a content strategist even, or a good copywriter and an excellent copywriter, is that an excellent copywriter or content strategist can walk the line between understanding the emotional consequences of something, because we don't want to ignore the emotional consequences, without stepping over the line into coercion. And what I'm hearing from your example is that great copy pushes the wrong people away as much as it attracts the right people in, because ultimately, even if you're making more money from more sales, if the people you're selling to aren't the people who are going to get the best value from the service or product that you're selling, then that's not going to be a win-win experience in the long term. They're not going to come back. They might buy less, etc. So there's a lot of value actually in helping people who might have a bad experience with your product or service because they're not a good fit to actually understand that ahead of time, so that they can make a different choice if that's not going to be a fit for them.
Yeah. And representing the negatives is one of the ways we can really easily do that, because it allows people to filter. Going back to sort of what I said earlier about like different online business models, you've got agency, you've got, you know, the online launch model, you've got coaching, you've got subscription services, you've got a whole bunch of different things. You know, if someone who, say, runs a drop shipping company is searching for content about copywriting and they find our podcast, great. Hi, welcome. We love hearing from you. But they're going to go to our website and they're going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, you guys work with agencies. You have a process that really works well with agencies. You're probably not, you're not the e-commerce drop shipping focused, strategists that I really want for my business, even though I like your content. And we do that partly by representing the problems that agency owners have on our site, right? Because we talk a lot about processes, hiring, people missing deadlines, all the sort of things that you deal with when you're managing contractors versus when you're dealing with, say, a drop shipping model. You've got inventory, stock, you've got, probably pay-per-click ads, you've got a whole different set of problems, right?
Yeah.
And when you don't represent those problems, you don't actually allow people to opt in or opt out or self-select in any way, whether or not they're a good fit for you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Actually, expanding on that as well, I think if you do this really good, there are additional opportunities that come up. Whereas, for example, basically what they are is, one is setting better expectations if someone isn't the best fit. And two is helping people who are a good fit refer you to others. And just to give kind of two personal examples from a Nancy there, one of the things, if you look at our site and our copy, in the past, I'm not 100% sure if it's still there now, but I think it is. One of the things we say is, our services probably aren't for you if you don't consistently sell web projects that are a minimum of $10,000. And that was something that, when I first started out in the copywriting world, I might have been afraid, well, what if people who don't fit that, like maybe they would hire us anyway, etc. But the reality is that having that there, it's there for a reason, right? Because our services cost a certain amount. We want to make sure that the people who are selling them to their clients or are able to actually do so profitably. There's all those sorts of reasons behind that. And that doesn't mean that we will never work with anyone who doesn't fit that criteria. What it has meant is that when I was in the sales seat, I had a lot more meaningful conversations where, for example, a partner who actually ended up being one of our top selling partners for the next, I think, 2 years, he right away was like, well, I'm going to be honest, my average project size is significantly lower. And I was like, well, did you see that? And we started talking about it. And he was like, no, I know that is where I want to be. I know that is where I need to be, regardless of whether I work with you. So I would love to use your services as a stepping stone to get there. And that ended up being such a win-win relationship because we were having that conversation up front and we were able to dig kind of beneath the surface and use that as a stepping stone to understand whether our values, our goals, etc. are aligned. And sure enough, he did lead his agency to be able to leverage that. On the other side of things, the other piece that I pointed out, which is allowing people to refer you. This story I have actually as a consumer, one of my absolute favorite podcasts that I can't recommend enough, that I was just recently speaking to the woman who runs it, hopefully about getting her as a guest on here. Her name is Susan Choi, and she runs a podcast called Stress Proof. And on the surface, her audience is similar to our audience. It's stress with success leaders who, want to understand their stress and, operate at a much higher capacity with a lot less energy going into it. But the fact is that because she speaks to the problems that she's addressing, not just in her intro, but in each topic specific episode, I've been able to refer her to so many more people. Because, for example, my contractor husband is not typically within the category of people that she serves. But when I'm listening to her say, okay, well, there's this topic, have you ever experienced this? And she lists off a bunch of symptoms and problems. I'm like, holy cow, I'm sending this to him right now. And ultimately, that's allowed me to connect 3 or 4 more listeners who are listening totally independently, who in turn can refer it to other people. And whether that results in literal direct sales, which it did for me because I bought her program, if it had been just valuable to me, I don't know if I would have. But knowing that her program is valuable to these other people in my life really pushed me over the edge to make it a no-brainer. And then on top of that, just the amount of coverage to help her become that thought leader in terms of her process, her framework, her intellectual property, that is invaluable on its own.
Yeah.
So anyways, kind of a side train a bit, but.
No, I love both of those because it speaks to the power of copy. And what I'm hearing you say is that when we are representing, when we're having these specifics, right, these things that are potentially negatives that are going to scare people away, we attract people who are either already there or, we're matching their vision and where they want to go, right? We're already addressing the transformation if they're not there yet. But the other thing is that really popped up for me is, when she's listing off symptoms and talking about all these problems, is like, really, when you get together with your friends and, you're talking together in your communities, what are you guys talking about? Sure, maybe we're talking about, Game of Thrones is over, so we're not talking about Game of Thrones anymore.
Bridgerton or the Queen's Gambit, I think right now in January 2021.
Yeah, we're talking about movies and pop culture, but a lot of the time when you sit down and you get really real with your people, it's like, what's going on in your life? Well, honestly, and especially when we're talking in professional networking circles, is like, well, what's going on for you? Honestly, we're really struggling with this. We're really struggling with that. People talk about their problems and therefore I don't want to say identify with the problems because then that leads to a whole therapy rabbit hole of self-identity. But it gives us sort of a quick, easy way to say, oh, you addressed that problem so-and-so was talking about, let me send your stuff over, right? Yeah. It's an easy way to make that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a few more kind of questions and topics for us to bounce back around as agency leaders. How can we leverage this when we're not the ones personally assessing or approving the copy? But before we get into that, I just want to talk about kind of one more element of this process of kind of understanding where people are at and reflecting it back at them, which is that as we are able to do this better, we not only help people identify whether this is for them and show them that we understand them and create an empathetic connection and create context and all of this stuff. We also very directly, this is not as sexy, but it's true, we very directly move them basically, if they're the right person, through the funnel and through the stages of awareness so that they can be closer to buying. Yeah. And what I mean, and this complements everything we've already said, which is that we're helping them make an effective decision. We're helping them understand whether this is for them. But the stages of user awareness, which if you're listening to this, you're probably already familiar with this in one form or another, but we like to simplify it to make it easier for clients to understand as well. And we basically look at someone who is interested in purchasing from us is either symptom aware, they are problem aware, they are solution aware, or they are ready to buy, essentially. And at the symptom aware stage, they may not even understand what the underlying problem is that their symptoms are telling them. And that alone, even if someone isn't the right customer for you, but more often when they are, can be so valuable in just, even if they never buy from you, in giving them value and helping them understand what the heck is going on, right? And this comes up a lot, not necessarily on a landing page, but in the supporting copy that goes into strategically positioned blog posts and stuff. If you're not just kind of pumping out things willy-nilly, if you have a strategy behind it, one of the things that you're looking to do is understand where your clients are, most of them, your prospects that are going to be a good fit, already at the stage of user awareness. Make sure that you're not forgetting to produce content that helps them get rid of their block there, and also addressing that there's probably people at all of the stages and that you want to help them with kind of each of those stages. So again, just a quick example, if someone's symptom aware, I'll use Susan Choi as an example for this. Again, I have had insomnia or I had insomnia. Actually, it's been pretty good recently, for most of 2 years. And if you look online about what can cause insomnia, holy cow, you're going to get overwhelmed with basically the same symptoms every time, which is can't fall asleep or can't stay asleep. That's basically what chronic insomnia boils down to. But in terms of what could be causing it, it could be diet, it could be your routine, it could be stress, it could be all these different things. And the solution can look a lot of different ways. And I remember her saying in a podcast episode, so picture this. Have you ever not been able to sleep for a couple weeks or maybe a couple of months? So you go online, you research, you buy a new pillow, maybe you buy a new mattress, you like overhaul this, you do that, and you're still not sleeping better. What the heck is going on? And I was just like, oh my God, I feel so called out. And I did feel a little uncomfortable, and it did twist the knife a little bit. Not like, oh, I'm a bad person or whatever, but I was like, holy cow, that is so me. And I thought I understood the problem behind my insomnia, which was, that my mattress wasn't good or my pillow didn't have enough loft or whatever. But when she put it in those terms, she recontextualized the symptoms. So I was like, oh, you're right. I've put a lot of money and a lot of hours into those solutions that didn't work because I misunderstood the problem. The root problem was something different entirely.
Yes.
But can't move on, until you understand what the true problem behind those symptoms are. Did you want to give an example of someone who's kind of like what problem aware moving towards solution aware would look like?
Oh my gosh. Sorry, I'm still stuck on the fact that one thing I want to say before I move on to the problem.
Yeah.
Is you don't necessarily want to make your people feel attacked or called out, but the fact that you were the living epitome of that, I'm in this photo and I don't like it meme, really really I think hits on what we're talking about, right? That is like, okay, like, yes, this is me and I can't deny it. And that's and that's kind of why you keep reading. It's like, okay, what is the solution, right? What is actually going on here? And so when you're problem aware, so when you say problem aware, do you mean aware of like the root cause or?
Essentially, problem aware, for people who are listening, as we define it at Anansi, is aware of what the root cause is, but unclear about what solution will address that problem. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, yeah. So I have a really good example personally about moving from symptom aware to problem aware. And that is, I spent several years with, weird health symptoms kept flaring up. I kept getting different diagnoses. And then I really wasn't feeling good. I had one day I had 8 cups of coffee and my brain wouldn't turn on. And I'm just like, something's really wrong here. And so I said, okay, I need to do something different. And it turns out I started working with a naturopathic doctor because I'd had a checkup with my GP and he's like, your blood work's fine. Like everything's great. And so I started working with this naturopath here in Vancouver, and she did this huge intake with me and said, I think you've got SIBO, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. She's like, we'll do some tests, but I'm 99% certain you've got this. And so realizing this was at the center of all of my weight gain issues, that, literally the diet I was eating to maintain my weight is the diet most people eat to lose weight. Right. And this was the diet that made me feel best because we thought I was gluten intolerant. We thought I had endometriosis. We thought there was a whole bunch of things going on. And she was able to finally be like, no, here's your root problem. Is you've got this overgrowth, it's messing with your histamine levels, which, is making your periods horrific. It's messing with because the gut brain connection is so huge, it's messing with your cognition. She was able to really get at the core issue here, that, none of the diet and lose weight programs, because I was working for a supplements company at the time. So I was in that space very heavily as, competitor research. So I was going through and like looking at all the programs and trying stuff out and seeing what works. And it wasn't until I actually knew the root cause that I was able to start evaluating solutions. So it's like, okay, that's why this diet didn't work. So this is the diet I need to be on now. This is what's going to help. These are the remedies I need to be taking. These are the things I need to be doing. And when you're problem aware, you start seeking out information that is far more specifically calibrated. Now,
Yes.
I still have like, what the YouTube algorithm is like, and the Facebook algorithm, they still recommend me all of this like health content, even though I've not been with that company for several years now. But it's just, that's in the history. So they're still sending me like keto this and paleo that and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, I can't have that ingredient. I can't have that. Once you move into problem where you start actually being able to filter a lot more,
Yes.
find far more relevant information. And in my case, it's not just gut health. It was stuff about like histamine intolerance and gut health and how to make the two work together, and a whole bunch of other things. So when you're in problem aware, knowing the root cause, and having content that talks and speaks to that is really important. And knowing what the root cause is for your people, right? Because the root cause for my issues could have been several different things, which is why we did a ridiculous number of tests.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what I'm hearing from you is that, as copywriters, once we have helped someone understand the root cause, we can then, and this all isn't usually in the same piece of content, we can then help them basically track which solutions may or may not be a fit for them according to that root cause. Like, for example, somebody comes to me and they're like, oh, maybe they're coming to me on consulting. They're like, I'm having trouble with hiring. Maybe they're coming to us for copy. And they're like, well, we are having a lot of trouble with projects being super slow. And we trace the root cause to the fact that they are having their clients write the copy themselves. And that is really where everything is breaking down. Well, it can be easy to say, well, the solution is you need to hire us. We'll replace the clients for copy. We're going to be your copywriters from now on, etc. But the truth is, again, the difference between a good copywriter and an excellent copywriter is the understanding that just because that a root problem is occurring doesn't necessarily mean that we are the best solution. And now it's up to us to bridge the gap. What sorts of things can help this person understand if we are the right solution? Well, bringing it back once again to, for example, we work with people who sell projects of a certain size, usually companies that are of a certain size themselves. Well, someone who is having their clients write the copy, and that's the root problem, sometimes, yes, they're in a position where their projects are big enough and et cetera that they can bring us on right away. But sometimes, whether it's in our marketing and our copy or even on a call, because it should all be aligned, we're going to help them understand where maybe hiring a freelancer or hiring someone in-house might be a better fit in certain circumstances. Sometimes even it's a better fit to give them some sort of structure to help their clients basically get them what they need in the time frame that they need. Or maybe it's hiring someone to write outlines. Like there are a lot of solutions, and it can be tempting to believe that your offer or your client's offer is the only solution. But helping someone become effectively solution aware is about genuinely showing them, and it's only really once you've gotten to that phase where they can identify that you or what you offer is the right solution, where then it's like, okay, let's break out the case studies. Let's break out what makes us different from other people. Let's break out these, because now you're helping them evaluate between near equals, as opposed to evaluate between totally different solutions.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
That makes total sense to me. And one thing I was going to say, like as a copywriter working on projects like this, one of the tactics I like to take is, instead of what problems are they having and then how do we solve it, I actually start with the client and the customer. What is their root problem? And then we extrapolate backwards as to what the symptoms are. And that is a really good way to avoid, first of all, getting the wrong people, because, just going back to my personal health example, the systems were so wide and varied and strange that I had like 4 different diagnoses of chronic illnesses, none of which it actually turned out to be, right? Because my symptoms were headaches, joint pain, fatigue, abdominal pain during my menstrual cycle, regular
clusters of symptoms.
Clusters of symptoms, but also common symptoms. Right?
Yeah.
And so when you start with the root cause, you can actually pull out some of the less common, more identifying symptoms to make sure you're targeting people up front who are feeling those symptoms, right? But you
Yes.
also, and when you're starting with the root cause too, you don't have to sort of keep hammering in all the consequences, because part of the reason I think we fall into those patterns of being so negative and just hammering in is probably insecurity. It's like,
Mm.
do like, you know what? It goes back to the snake oil salesman. Why is he pushing so hard? Because he knows it's snake oil, right? He
Yeah.
just wants your money. And
Yeah.
when you see them pushing that hard, it very much becomes a red flag for me that like, hey, you know what? Maybe you're actually not going to do what
Yeah.
you say you're going to do, or maybe you're not actually the solution I need, because you're just pushing in. And when you're that general too, it's very hard to have really specific specific symptoms up front, and
Yeah.
specific
Yeah, so
pain
much of this
points.
I think could be
Yeah,
summarized with how to be specific in your copywriting.
exactly.
Yeah,
It can be summarized as, we are not trying to be negative, we are trying to be specific.
specific. Yeah. And, when I'm evaluating other people's copy, whether often that's internally where I'm having discussions with evaluating is maybe the wrong word, but when I'm reviewing with a strategist their copy, because it's less about is this up to par and more about how can we make this better?
Mhm.
So often, my feedback is a different version of make it more specific. And so often when clients have, feedback and something needs to be changed or revised, it's either a different form of specific or more specific in a way that they or the audience can understand.
Mhm.
But I do want to pull us back around a little bit through the lens of an agency leader who is managing probably like copywriters and also managing the client, but isn't directly involved necessarily in the copy process. What are some of the ways that an agency leader can set effective expectations with the client ahead of time and basically help prep them for this? Because I can just hear people listening to this being like, okay, well, I get this,
Mhm.
but how the heck do I communicate this to my client? And of course, because we at Anansi are huge on, addressing things before they become a problem, how can they set expectations and address this with their client before the client is freaking out about things being negative?
Absolutely. So there's a couple things that immediately come to mind. The first is we send over a video with every draft, and we tell them like how to address things, and we talk about the necessity of representing the problem, and we phrase it like that. We're not here to, rub salt in the wound. We don't want to do any of those things, but we do want to represent the problem. So we educate them on the necessity. If I have a client who needs a little bit more hand holding, I will often do a personalized Loom video and go through the drafts and explain point by point kind of what's where and why. And that often gets the client out of some of the reactivity of it, and in a place where they're more, okay, yeah, this was written this way. We understand. We don't necessarily like it. We think it needs to be changed, but they're no longer like, what the hell did you send us? Right. So you can
Okay, yeah.
you can mediate it that way. The other thing I think that is really important is when you're building a copy process, make sure everything is balanced. So in our copy reference guides, our messaging anchors, the way we do our avatars is very, very balanced. We list out external challenges, we list out internal challenge. We have the external transformation, we have how they feel about everything. Everything is very balanced in terms of both pain points and transformation and what they get after. So we're not presenting copy to clients that is overwhelmingly negative, right? When they read the whole page, it's like, oh, there's a represented problem up here, and then there's the transformation at the bottom, and they get the balance of it.
So it's all within context. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And we've built a process. So when you're hands off and you're overseeing people, we've built a process that kind of ensures that we build that balance into our projects every time, instead of going too far or having too little or not having enough. Right? Because if you have no problem represented, it's like, who are you? What do? And how do you even help anyone, let alone me? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So just running this back through the lens of the agency leader. So what I'm hearing is actively engage your copywriter in this process is what I'm hearing. You know, you yourself as an agency leader may not have the time or the perspective to kind of go through the draft and kind of record a big video or something, but you can certainly ask your copywriter. You can be like, hey, you know, I'm concerned that the client won't understand this language. You've explained it to me. It makes perfect sense to me. Maybe when we submit the drafts, could you put together, you know, a 2-minute video just going over a few of your key choices? So I'm hearing that that kind of back and forth can look like the leader who maybe knows the client better can help identify where some of those concerns might be and where some of those kind of points of uncertainty might be, and give direction to the copywriter in terms of basically by controlling the process, by supporting the process if their copywriter doesn't already have something established to help kind of bridge that gap. I'm also hearing that the more you can bake into the process itself these opportunities for learning, whether it is, a pre-recorded video like we had a Nancy send out that kind of walks the client through some of these concepts so they understand ahead of time. The more you kind of bake it into the process, the less energy and effort you're going to need to do potentially, corralling things back in later if they go off the rails because you didn't set up those expectations. Is that?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. You very much want to anticipate and kind of get ahead of the client because, you know, your job as a project leader, obviously we want to be the guardrails. We want to keep people on track.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, one of the other things that I learned from sales is, you know, when you're writing copy, yes, you're answering all their questions, but you need to answer them in the order they come up. And when they're reading drafts, there's a very specific order questions and objections tend to come up in. So knowing, you know, having done enough projects, it's like, okay, I know this is probably going to come up. And especially trusting the person who's like, say me as a copy leader, I know that I will know the client generally better than you. So I can be like, okay, you know what, this client probably isn't going to worry about negativity, but I know they might have some concerns about the voice. So I'm going to explain the choices and just reassure them. These are not final drafts. This is fixable.
Yes.
This is changeable.
Yes.
A lot of the
big
time they freak out because it's like, I don't like this. This isn't right. It's like, oh, it's okay. You know what? We can fix this. This is not complete. This is not done. We still have, more sessions. We still have more time. We want to get you something, that works and that you like, and that is going to do the job we need it to do. So it is very much a matter of, like you said, taking the lead and both reassuring and anticipating. I think those go hand in hand.
Yeah. I like those two concepts. Anticipating, so understanding, okay, what problems could come up, often based on what problems have come up in the past. And then reassuring, which I'm hearing is helping your client understand that you guys are both on the same side and it's us versus the problem rather than the client versus the copywriter or the client versus the agency leader or something like that. We all have the same goals and we're supporting each other in getting there. I'm also hearing, and I think this is a really big one, is that people who are either leading a project or managing the copywriter, but not directly involved in the copy, educating the client about the revision process is really, really critical, both on the mindset level, which is, I'm hearing from you, reassuring them that the first drafts they're getting are not the final drafts, and that it's going to be a collaborative process to get towards the final drafts. I would also strongly suggest making sure that they understand how many rounds of revisions are in there, because that helps you set stronger boundaries around what those rounds of revisions look like in order to kind of support that collaborative process. But that doesn't require you to understand all of the style choices that were made. It just requires you to talk with your copywriter or content strategist about the process, about what key things the client needs to understand to make sure that you're also representing them and on the same page.
The one thing I would add in there to say is also clarifying the scope of revisions. I've had clients kind of want me sometimes to throw out one page and then write a totally new page from,
and that's not usually what revisions are about.
That's not revisions. That is a new page, or they'll want to completely change the voice and tone, or they're changing the audience. no, like we fixed those in earlier in the process.
Yeah, so do that checking.
Yes.
Again, like your content, this again comes in as to whether you're working with a content strategist or copywriter, etc. If you're working with a content strategist, they should be managing essentially the project and the relationship at a much higher level. Versus if you have a copywriter, then you are often, unless they're a really, really good copywriter, doing some of that in between.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm hearing is that you kind of have to be aware there, number one, of which one is what your situation is and how large your role is there. But I'm hearing that helping the copywriter potentially bridge the gap can be really, really important in terms of understanding where you're trying to go.
Yeah.
Am I?
That makes a lot of sense. I want to kind of relate it back to our process here at Anansi.
Yeah.
Because, Tanya, our sales manager, she is phenomenal because she walks everybody through the process. So when I, as your content strategist, I'm leading you through, I'm not saying these things to you for the first time. The clients heard them before. And so they're, this is a refresher. This is not something new. And that way too, they knew all of this before they signed the contract. They kind of have an idea of what they're getting into and how the project's going to go. Our first call, we always review process and kind of educate them what happens at each stage. So they're never taken by surprise. And that cuts down on a lot because we can do the clarification up front instead of, having to deal with client issues in the middle of a project, which potentially leads to crunch time or missing deadlines, projects getting pushed back, all kinds of stuff that we don't want. So really building in a process that kind of, I don't want to imply that, the clients are children or whatever, but like really just kind of holds their hand and, really supports them in understanding what's going on from the first step. Right?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I was kind of flailing my way towards there with the last thing I said that I think is resonating really strongly with what you're saying is understand where you're making the key decisions and who owns that process. So like, for example, the Anansi process we've spoken about a few times here. We have messaging anchors as step 1, foundation copy is step 2, and growth strategy is step 3. And we're not making those decisions about what the problems, the pain, the symptom, the stage of awareness, any of that in the writing section. We are actually making those decisions in the messaging anchor section, getting sign off and agreement and doing those negotiations and conversations then, so that when we get to the writing stage, we can refer back to that and make sure that we, again, are all on the same in terms of us versus the problem. And one thing just to consider is that if you're not working with a content strategist or a copywriter who has a version of messaging anchors as their first stage, then you need to understand as the leader who the owner of that is. Is it you? Is it your project manager? Do you have a strategist who's just kind of doing general project strategy, or brand strategy? Like, you need to understand where those decisions are being made, because otherwise they're not being made and you're going to have way bigger problems and way bigger conversations at that copy stage, which is what I'm hearing you talk about, Caelin, where then we have delays and frustration and
absolutely and unhappy clients and all kinds of all the detritus of running an agency.
Okay. Do you have time for one last question before we wrap up? Okay. So I think this is really, really, really helpful so far. My last question before we kind of start to wrap up here is, how can a leader help their client assess copy more effectively?
So a leader as in the content strategist on the project or the...
So as in the agency leader. So once again, we're talking about a situation where the agency leader is maybe managing the client relationship, maybe managing the overall web project or marketing project, but there's a client, there's a copywriter, etc. Once again, we've talked about how we can kind of set expectations, all this kind of stuff, but it comes down to the client understanding this stuff. So how can, because we're using a lot of kind of jargony words and stuff that are industry specific, how can an agency leader who is not a copywriter help their client assess copy more effectively?
That is a very good question. I think an industry leader who's not a copywriter can help their client assess copy effectively. partly by looking at the strategy that's being laid out. Okay, especially with our process, we lay out the strategy beforehand, everybody signs off on it, and part of the presentation of the strategy is explaining to them, right? Is that okay, we discovered these things, therefore we're going to write to these other things. So I think one of the ways is, did you hit X, Y, and Z? And then going back again, digging into the root problem, well, you might not be a copywriter, but you might be better positioned to help dig into that root problem with the client. Is the root problem, that we didn't get the voice and tone right? Is the root problem that you think we're speaking to the wrong audience? Is the root problem something within the copy? Was it within the strategy? I think that's very, very valuable. And I know as a copywriter, sometimes you can get a bit lost in defending your own words and being like, this is what I do, right? I am right. Especially when if you're dealing like with us, when you deal with conversion content, there are very strong science-backed studies and tests showing, sometimes that
what is effective,
the way to do it to get the result you want. And
conversion copy is more science than art. I wrote an article about this.
Absolutely. And so there's a point where it's like, no, like you told me you wanted conversion. I'm probably going to dig in my heels a bit more. But you as an agency owner can be like, okay, like what's going on? Did we misunderstand the brief? Where is this?
Okay, I'm actually going to pause you there, Caelin, though, because I'm curious. Let's say the project hasn't, I'm hearing loud and clear. If the client isn't liking something, digging into the why and understanding kind of that strategy behind is really important. But what if the project hasn't gone off the rails yet? Okay. Or we don't want it to go off the rails at all.
Right.
How can an agency leader set their client up to assess copy effectively without going off the rails? Is it just more of kind of what we've already spoken about in terms of, as an agency leader, make sure that you kind of understand the strategy as well as the copywriter? Is it all in kind of those setting expectations and videos and kind of process stuff? What can they do kind of right from the beginning to ease the process?
I think one of the things that you can do from the beginning is back up your people and trust your people. And really go, okay, like, you know what? Be honest with the client. Look, I'm not a copywriter. That's why I have these experts on
this person's an expert. I trust them. They have my full faith.
Exactly.
Take care of
I trust
you,
their
etc.
decision-making skills. And that really, sets the expectations for the client that they're going to be dealing with the copywriter, what the copywriter knows, that their knowledge is trusted, and that sort of thing. Because that, I think, is honestly, if you're not familiar with copy, I've had critiques before from people who are not copywriters, and there have been points where I have completely written them off because like, you clearly don't understand what I'm trying to do with this piece, so you're not actually giving me helpful feedback. So I think as an agency owner, or as someone in charge of copywriters but not familiar with copy yourself, having just like a basic understanding of what copywriting tries to do and achieve is very, very important. So you don't need to be an expert, but you do need to know the basics that you can say, okay, are we hitting X, Y, and Z? Our hierarchy of content needs is really excellent for this. Is it readable? Is it engaging? Does it hit kind of the base metrics that anyone can really assess? So being familiar enough with the basics and then really backing up your experts, because they'll be the ones who have to talk about the specifics and the strategy and that sort of stuff. And then just being a little bit familiar with the project. You don't need to be an expert on it, but knowing the high, broad strokes of what's going on, I think, are the best ways you can support your writers.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to add on to that, screen your people really, really well. Your client, that includes clients, screen your clients well, but also your copywriters or your content strategists, or work with an organization like us that screens them super well. We're an agency, not in the sense that we have 100 writers at your disposal. We have 5, but each one of those 5, we don't need to necessarily know what your project is. Like maybe we can give you one who will be a especially good fit. But the fact is that someone can trust us as a company because they've worked with us before without individually knowing every copywriter. Or alternatively, if you do have that awareness, you can screen your copywriters up front so that you can trust them with the project. And I'm hearing that's kind of an unspoken piece, but that's one of the things, just like leader to leader, that I hear so often is the people, making sure someone will hire someone and just expect them to thrive and expect them to be great. But that is on you as a leader. You need to screen your people, your people either directly or via referral or by working with organizations who screen people for you, essentially.
Absolutely. Screening. And I think especially for freelance writers, if you've had issues with writers meeting deadlines, with issues with content quality, really screen. And that's just the big thing, right?
Yeah.
Because if
absolutely.
if they mess up a trial project, probably not a good fit.
Yeah.
Right?
And screen for your values as well, because as we're talking from the context of our values, which we know most of our listeners share, which is once again, that ethical and effective marketing that builds strong communities. We are not the ultra aggressive direct response people. Those people still exist. I've worked with marketing companies as well as writers who go for that approach. And that's not our approach. Someone could be really, really good. Like for example, another name in our industry is very effective at what they do, but whereas we are all kind of process and people and etc., that person is 100% results focused. And maybe the admin or the process side isn't going to work, but speaking to, someone who that is their primary copywriting source, they specifically said to me, I can forgive a lot of process issues and a lot of vagueness if I'm ultimately getting the results that I need. Yeah. And that's totally valid, but that's not us, right? Like we're going to get you the results, but it's incredibly important to us to adhere to a process and to have that predictability and et cetera. And the people we work with also share those values. So also really important. I think
that ties back really nicely too to what we were saying about how negativity is often specificity and selection, right?
Yes.
Because when you're doing that sort of screening, when you know that what you value most is results and you're willing to waive process stuff for it, that lets you choose far more effectively than just, okay, here's a writer who makes claims about how great they are and I like their samples, let's hire them, right? Yeah. So that I think just ties back to everything we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done kind of AMA style sessions with other content strategy and copywriting companies, which is actually where this example comes from. And straight up, the leader of that company said that on the call in almost the same words, and the third company that was there had a different approach and a different specialty. And that kind of specificity, even with all of us on the call together, we weren't really competing against each other because each one of us had specificity in terms of the types of problems, the types of pains that we resolve, and the solution that we offer and what you can expect from that. Yeah. So yeah. Awesome. Okay. We are at time, unfortunately, but as I start to wind us down, Caelin, do you have any last words of wisdom that you want someone listening to this right now to walk away with?
So especially if you're an agency leader and you're assessing copy, or if you're a client and you're wondering if it's too negative, sit on it for 24 hours. Yeah. Come back to it with clearer eyes later. If it's still, striking you as, I'm, something about this is not sitting comfortably with me, then that's when you have a talk. But give it 24 hours. You will always come back to, you'll always see copy differently and you'll see everything with new eyes after a good night's sleep.
Yes.
just give yourself a chance to settle after the initial reaction so you can be a little bit more objective. Because oftentimes, yes, I'm writing to please you as my client, but I'm not writing your website for you. I'm writing your website for your clients. So it's not always about you. I hate to say it, but keep that in mind. Yeah,
it's so true. Awesome. Well, thank you, Caelin, for this excellent conversation. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. So we're kind of playing with this idea a little bit since Celine is away of having digital agency real talk episodes with other internal people on the team. So more conversations with Caelin about the practical application of copywriting, where Caelin is bringing that, sales, marketing, content strategy perspective, and I'm bringing the agency leader perspective. We also have, at this point, we have so many people on the team with so many specialties. We've been considering maybe doing another one or two about sales with Tanya, maybe one about the more tech side of effective strategic marketing with Jake. So just let us know. Leave comments, reviews, email us, go on our website and fill out the form, anansicontent.com, and let us know what you think. Let us know if there are any topics that you'd like to learn more about, because we have so much to share. And as well, some of the resources that we've mentioned during this episode. So a lot of this is stuff that we've produced exactly for the purpose of helping agency leaders like you manage your copywriters and your clients more effectively without needing to be an expert in everything and personally in the weeds. So, our content hierarchy of needs to help you assess what we consider to be effective copy at different levels, hierarchy of growth strategy needs. We have a ton of resources available for you. So we'll probably link some of them to the show notes, but do check out our blog for more in-depth articles about this stuff and so many different kind of like worksheets and templates and stuff that you can use to put this stuff into practice. Yeah, and make it easier on yourself. Let our trial and error pave your way, because we know that you already have way too much shit on your plate, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you have an excellent rest of your day. Hopefully this has given you something new to think about and chew on. And we will, I guess, see you or talk to you next week.